Hello everyone, this is RaySpace and welcome back to Realism Overhaul Sandbox in Kerbal Space Program 1.12, where I continue to test my Rocket Sled, which is a means to launch a passenger spacecraft that allows the passengers to load in horizontally as you normally would with aircraft and then launch. Of course, if you have the huge spacecraft poised vertically and there's lots of seats, it's really hard for passengers to actually get into those seats. You could tilt the whole thing up, but that can cause problems too. Well, this is just one way of dealing with that. Now, as far as the Orion carrier plane actually not hitting the track, I've pretty much got that down. At no point in my testing did it actually hit the track. There, we actually lost the engines. The engines had ullage problems. The fuel wasn't feeding into the engines, and so the engines all quit. Ultimately, I modified the engines so that they do not require ullage. It's a bit of a thing, but if Kerbal's gonna be like this, normally they wouldn't quit. I don't know why they're turning off when everything should be quite settled at that point. There's no reason for it to be unsettled. So I just said, well, if Kerbal is going to mess around with them, here it knocked out 7 of the 9 engines on the tail of the Orion carrier plane. I decided that I would just modify the engines so that they don't need the fuel to be settled, because there's no reason for them to be unsettled. The real problem here is that we keep losing the body flap though, which is right underneath the engines and keeps striking the rocket sled itself. I've made sure that it can't strike the decoupler between the Orion carrier plane and the rocket sled, because the decoupler is very specifically shaped so that it's completely clear of the body flap, but still the tail tends to strike the rocket sled. So here I've modified the engines to make sure that they don't accidentally turn off, and the issue is how to solve the body flap problem. There's many tweaks that I decided to do during the course of a live stream where I was testing this. Before I did any of those things though, since I just fixed the engines and restarted, I wanted to see where we were at as far as keeping the body flap safe. And so this is without any further modifications. And here, it went off like that, more horizontally so it didn't strike the tail, and we kept the body flap, so that's good. I've already done quite a lot to try and keep this thing safe. You can see the rocket-assisted takeoff boosters on the side of the Orion carrier plane there. Packs and packs of those that then rotate horizontally to get streamlined. I don't dump them off. We want to try and make everything as reusable as possible in this case. The purpose of this, by the way, is so that we have some way of delivering people to the huge O'Neill cylinder that I'm also constructing. That was also in the save. And so the Orion 3 spaceplane will eventually rendezvous with the O'Neill cylinder and deliver its 24 passengers into the O'Neill cylinder. That's just for fun. Of course, we're not going to fully populate the O'Neill cylinder. That would take a lot. But this is one way for Kerbals to get into the O'Neill cylinder, and certainly the most cinematic way, I guess. Now, this Orion 3 spaceplane isn't exactly like the Orion 3 in 2001: Space Odyssey, because it's got the vertical stabilizers, and I'm using methane and oxygen, and the reason for all that is because it works, as opposed to the design from 2001: A Space Odyssey, which maybe they took some liberties on. Anyway, that gets to orbit, a little bit of a lopsided orbit there, but then I jump back to the Orion carrier plane and try to land it. And the issue with the body flap really comes down to whether we can bring it back down. It's really not a problem as far as the going up part. It's the coming back down with this Orion carrier plane that when you lose the body flap, you can't do it. And I'll show that later on in the video. This time we have the body flap, and so there's the sort of nominal return. It wouldn't have any crew on board. This would be just an automated return. And it's landing in the Bahamas, on my runway in the Bahamas. The liftoff was from Tampico, incidentally. And the reason I picked this is because there's a nice corridor from Tampico to the Bahamas where there's no island or anything in the way, and so it's all quite clear. There won't be any debris striking anybody. So that is the goal. We actually fly just south of the Florida Keys. I guess if the wind was bad, maybe things could go wrong there. You can see the Florida Keys off to the left as we bounced off of the atmosphere once there. The G-force is surprisingly not as bad as they have been. I don't know how that happened, but anyway, that's our flight path there. And then we have to make a left turn towards the runway at the Bahamas. And so I'm just making sure everything's all right here. In order to make this happen too, we have to dump the extra fuel with the Orion carry plane. For payloads, that is uncrewed missions, we don't need to launch horizontally, we launch vertically, and in that case the Orion carry plane has just enough to use the Mini-Star to launch its rated maximum payload. But the Orion 3 spaceplane with the passengers, it doesn't need as much fuel as it actually carries. So we could underfuel in the first place, but if we underfuel, then that throws off the rocket sled launch. So I keep the Orion carry plane fully fueled and just dump the fuel. That's not great, but we don't want to throw off the rocket sled at all. The timing of it has to be very precise, otherwise things go horribly wrong. For instance, the sled won't stay on the track, it'll end up being dumped at the end of it instead of being able to retro safely. Because the sled stays on the track, it retros itself using its forward SRVs to stay on the track. But, you know, if the whole thing is lighter, it'd be going faster at that point. Also, there's no good reason to go faster because you're hitting the speed of sound and the drag is horrible, so it ends up being pointless. So you'll note that the vehicle actually is just at the speed of sound when it proceeds off the track. Anyway, here we have a nice landing, and I proceed with further attempts. And it always wants to hop and then try to get rid of the body flap like that. Kerbal's always trying to get rid of the body flap somehow, but I managed to keep it safe this time. So that was successful. Is that consistent is the question. If this was just a matter of recording once for YouTube or something like that, I could probably do it. It'd succeed like one every 3 times or whatever, and I could make it look like it's wonderful. But I actually like my stuff to be consistent and work almost all the time. Let's give Kerbal some credit for being chaotic. So here, unfortunately, it did strike the tail. I don't know what is different the last time. It seems like it sort of bounces a little bit. It's a matter of the colliders between the sled and the track, and if they're sort of in a different position, it ends up being horrible. And so this time it tilted up and everything got thrown off. The body flap got exploded, and when I tried to bring it down, here on the first bounce off of the atmosphere, it was fine, though we actually ended up hot enough so that the separation motors that I have on the side of it overheated and exploded. At least the tail ones did. But yeah, as I've indicated, it's not going to survive the second entry into the lower atmosphere. So here, the little Separatrons back there blow up. But otherwise, not too bad. The G-force was only 8.1 Gs, which is actually quite manageable. I brought that up to check. I was curious because the G-force gauge on the side seemed to be it's moderate for this kind of thing, let me put it that way. I'm usually expecting 11 Gs. But unfortunately, on the next entry, I was checking the control surfaces to make sure things weren't locked unexpectedly. The inner flaps on the wing are non-active. Only the ailerons on the wing are active. But you can see that the whole thing has pitched down and can't seem to pitch up, and that's because we don't have the body flap. But it's amazing that the body flap is that influential, but as far as concerned, it is. So I start modifying things further because we obviously don't have any consistency. I try to set the body flap, give the body flap a spoiler thing so that it'll start off tilted up. And I'll have the script start it tilted up and then release it. So it's pretending to be a spoiler here. That may not be good. If it's really influential, it might cause drag that I don't want. But overall, I think we need to save it somehow. So I tried this option out with it tilting up 15 degrees so it doesn't hit the engines, of course. Also, I decided to make sure that the script would lock the gimbaling on the engines while they're spooling up and only release the gimbaling when the Orion carrier plane releases from the rocket sled, so that just in case the gimbaling was causing the bounciness. But really, I think Well, you can take a look for yourself. So here's how it's going. And this time it was clear. It didn't pitch up that much. It pitches up a little bit more than some other times. This time it kept the body flap safe, and the question is whether these measures really had sufficient effect or whether that was just, you know, happenstance. It was just luck. So, once again, actually there was a try in the middle between this try and the previous try, and I decided not to include that because on that one I accidentally left the body flap tilting up 30 degrees, so I didn't consider it valid. So that time, however, it did fail. Okay, here it's clear again. I decided that if I could get working 3 times in a row, that would be good enough for me. So this is twice, not counting the one that I decided to throw out as a test because it was inconsistent. So, can it do it 3 times in a row? Managed to clear without killing the body flap. And again, the only significance to that is the carry plane coming back down. I won't even follow it back down most of the time, but I do like things to be legit. So here we go again. And this time it hit. It didn't even make an explosion, but it was enough of a hit to get rid of the body flap. So no luck. I mean, in all these tries after I got the engines fixed, the payload would get to orbit. We would be fine on that. It's just a matter of the Orion carrier plane's return that's the issue with the body flap. So Kerbal's just being very inconsistent about whether it's going to kill the body flap or not, and I haven't come up with a good solution for that unless I make the body flap invulnerable. Anyway, with that, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do press like. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them in the comment section below, and I'll see you next time.